Welcome to the latest Personal Care Global webinar. My name is Tim Probert and I am the editor of Personal Care. Today's presentation is from Shell Chemicals. Shell Chemicals has been helping its customers achieve their business goals for more than 90 years. Its integrated energy and chemical parks, combined with its chemicals-only facilities, enables Shell Chemicals to supply a wide range of chemical building blocks to industrial customers around the world safely and reliably. Because chemicals shape our everyday world, Shell Chemicals is innovating ways to meet the needs of both customers and consumers by producing effective products while striving to minimize impacts on the environment. As global industries shift to become more sustainable, many companies are reshaping how they want to manufacture and distribute their products. Each company is on a different journey to sustainability, and Shell Chemicals helps customize solutions to meet their needs at their own pace. Today's presentation will be given by Dr. Jarek Juliet. As Senior Global Quality Assurance Manager, Jarek oversees the development and management of all quality aspects of Shell Chemicals' higher olefins and derivatives portfolio. The higher olefins comprise Shell Neodene product line, while the derivatives include Shell Neodol alcohols and alcohol ethoxylates. Jarek is also involved in the technology development and implementation of regulatory requirements supporting Shell Chemicals' sustainable offerings. Jarek, a dual citizen of the United States and the Seychelles, earned a PhD in organic chemistry from the University of Oregon. Based in Houston, Texas, and a keen cyclist, Jarek is an author and contributor to more than 30 patents and publications. Jarek's presentation is titled, "Why are global consumers willing to invest more in sustainable personal care products that retain performance?" Well, research shows that for many people, product quality comes before cost. It may be a counterintuitive trend, but it's one that is shared globally. In this webinar, you will learn how you can incorporate sustainability into your products without sacrificing performance and leverage this consumer trend. At the end of the presentation, there will be a live question and answer session, so don't delay in submitting your questions via the GoToWebinar questions text box. Over to you, Jarek.
Thank you, Tim, for this fine introduction. I really appreciate the kind words. I'd like to start off by really just asking you all to look at two sets of numbers, 482 and 973. There's, they're two numbers that kind of feature prominently into this conversation. And then I will move to really what amounts to be when we're having any sort of talk from Shell Chemicals or Shell in general, we'd like you to basically read this note or take a picture of it, but I will save you the trouble and tell you that please do not use anything that I say today as advice for investing or doing anything on your 401k or whatever. This is a conversation around technology and science and has no bearing and should not have any bearing on any financial decision you may choose to make. So now going back to those two wonderful numbers that I love so much. Well, what are they? 482 is $482 billion, which is what the beauty and personal care market was valued in roughly 2021 or so. It was done in that estimate in that time frame. And 973 billion is what it is estimated it will become in 2030. So to me, and when I start seeing 973 and the big B, I start to think, oh my gosh, we're approaching $1 trillion business. And this is what we're Shell Chemicals, we're also looking to feature prominently in there. So this is what I want to speak to you about, is what the kind of work that we are doing in this market space and how we are looking to provide you with the sustainable and the innovative solutions in that area. This is roughly the agenda that I will do my best to stick to. I will basically summarize research that we've done in this area and talking to different consumers and try to understand their expectations and also trying to gain their biosustainability preferences, because everyone has different preferences. We really want to try and understand what are consumers interested in, what do they want to hear about, and what do they prioritize. And then next to that, I really wish to show you how biomass balance can fit into the sustainable journey one might be on. And essentially for us, we see that as an enabler in one sustainable transformation. And from that piece, then I will move towards really describing to you the Shell bio-based Neodol, because we see that the bio-based Neodol family of products, for example, we see that as a sustainable ingredient source. And I will walk you through that, and hopefully I'll be able to show you that clearly. And then lastly, I will touch on the sustainability and supply chain resilience and in relation to palm kernel PKO products, because those feature so prominently in the personal care business. And then also we'll touch on the regulatory challenges that we have. And then I'll have some concluding thoughts. And as Tim said, we should have some time for some Q&A afterwards. So back in 2020, because I want to touch here on the consumer demands and preferences, we conducted a survey. This was done as a global survey. It had about 1,800 participants, respondents, if you will, spread across the world. We was represented by China in the East, and then we had the Americas, we had Brazil and the United States, and then we had Western Europe participants, basically being Great Britain, France, and Germany. And three things really stood out was that when we talked to consumers and we said, what are your preferences? Clearly what came across as the priority for everyone was performance quality. Everything was dictated by performance quality. Consumers want a product, and they want to prioritize a product that works well and performs well. And second to that is, the second preference was that it smelled nice. And at first myself, when I looked at the data, I said, oh, it smelled nice. Oh, well, that's nice. Well, in reality, when I kind of sat back and I thought about it, I said, well, that makes sense. After all, why would one I know myself, I would not want to wear something or put something on my skin or my hair, right, if it did not smell nice. So that in itself, it's consistent, right? But the third one, which to us also really stood out, was that consumers want a customized product. They want a product that fits or is really designed or customized for either their hair type or their skin type. I don't want to say gone are the days, but really the idea of having a generalized product that can be used across multiple hair types or skin types, consumers really, they want to design for their individual needs. So you see that individuality come across in there. So after that, then we proceeded to have a go and try to understand what are their interests in a bio product, right? And here we asked the question, and that's the chart on the top right, so you don't really need to dive into it. I will walk you through it really, So we asked them and said, what are your interests in a performance product that, for example, is 100% bio versus a fossil-based product? And across all the areas surveyed, we saw everybody preferred 100% bio. Greater than 75% of the respondents say they wanted a 100% bio source product. And especially in China and Brazil, you saw very high numbers, 90, 85% in there, but still it was very high across the board. And then we also looked to gauge their interest in a mixed feed, a mixed source being a combination of a bio source commingled or mixed with a fossil, and comparing that to 100% bio. And again, it wasn't not necessarily unsurprising in that across the board, again, everybody would prioritize a 100% bio source product. But at the same time, we saw a lot of interest in a mixed source of feed. So again, it was very high again in China and Brazil. And we're not necessarily certain how to how to interpret that. Maybe it's because, everybody, that whole segment just prioritizes performance quality above all. But in the end, what you see is that consumers, for example, really want they're very confident or they're very interested in a mixed source of product. And then the other piece that we surveyed, because we're talking here about bio and products and sustainability, we really wanted to try and understand, what do people see? When a consumer says, this is sustainable, what is that, right? You kind of talk to them and say, well, what do you mean by sustainable? And this was an interesting piece because, when you placed a whole slew of attributes in there. What came out of that is kind of averaging all the respondents together. Natural was the primary attribute that the respondents favored. They see something that is classified as sustainable, or a process that has the sustainability clause tied to it. To them, that is a natural. They associate natural to it, and a lot of others also really see it as an eco-friendly. But then as you go down, for example, you see a lot of interest in, to some people, sustainability means it's healthy. To some, it means it's a high quality product. And to some folks, they associate sustainability as sustainable packaging. Maybe a product was delivered in a recycled plastic or something, and to some, it means ethical. I didn't really put much stock on the fact that it's more expensive or trendy. But when you kind of look at it, you see there's a social what's the word I would say is, people have a social expectation, there's around what they see in their minds as what sustainability is, they see it again as ethical or quality or whatever. But again, the primary attribute being it is natural. So kind of summarize what the customer preferences, right? When we look at them, what we see is that consumers they displayed a high level of interest in bio ingredients. They want their beauty or personal care products to be rich or high, they have the high level in a bio-sourced product. Again, performance quality, that is still their number one. That is, what drives their purchase. They want the performance to be the key, and they're willing to spend more for that. That is something we gained from that. But then when you really go back and you look at it, you see that, well, they want both, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, right? They want a product that performs well and has bio ingredients. So that's where we at Shell, right? And we're looking to see how do we innovate in this area, right? Because when you innovate in this area, right, and you want to grow and you want to also provide sustainable products, well, one of the challenges you have is, well, if you want performance quality, well, you like to have it demonstrated. And we feel, for example, if you have an existing product, and if you really want to try and change it, well, now you really start to move into the reformulation piece, and that, as you know, is time consuming. It's very expensive. You get all the testing that goes along with it. So it would be nice, for example, if you could incorporate bio ingredients into the existing manufacturing chain. And that is where mass balance, we arrived at mass balance at Shell Chemicals. So what is mass balance? In a nutshell, and we'll talk about this for the next two slides also, it's really an accounting-based process that allows you to commingle a sustainable feed in an existing manufacturing chain, supply chain that is sourced from a fossil feedstock. And it allows you, it follows strict chains traceability. You have the supply chain is well established. The chain of custody all the way through there is audited. And that's one of the most important parts about the mass balance scheme. Yes, it is a scheme, but it is certified and audited by independent third parties. I list over here at least three I know of. ISCC Plus, they have the Red Cert, and you have SCS Global. So those are all different folks that actually perform and do these auditing and certification of the mass balance system, And when you look at the raw materials, for example, I show here, I have biocircular or bio-based feedstocks, right? Because when you talk about biomass or bio-based feedstocks, those represent any sort of biogenic carbon that can be brought into the fold and converted by some process, be it a hydroprocessing unit or whatever. There's multiple different processes you can use that allows you to make a raw material that can then be co-fed with your existing fossil feedstock, and then that can then go through your manufacturing process and onto your final products. And I list just on the side there, right? So you can see sugarcane, you can see corn, you can see soybean oil, forestry residues, used cooking oil, and of course, just to touch on there, right? One of the things we at Shell, and I'll mention this again, even though I do show corn on there, we do not source biocircular or bio-based material that competes with food, right? We typically will use residues and what have you that are spent material. So, okay. Oops. So speaking about the benefits of the mass balance approach, that looks to be a bit of a busy slide, but really I want you to focus really on just the 5 core principles or advantages of it, right? So again, on the bottom, I show, we're bringing in either a bio-based or biocircular feeds, and we speak about affordability. Well, why is it affordable? Well, we're going to leverage the existing asset, right? The existing asset that is making products that are well established into the marketplace. And we'll have an upstream component to it, but in the end, we have the benefits of scale of these existing assets that are there. The quality is an important piece because, as I mentioned earlier, if you're looking to try and do this differently, reformulation is expensive, and that in itself and it's time consuming. So if you have a product that is coming into it that is identical to what you already had, now you truly have a drop-in solution. It is important to note that when we speak about the mass balance approach, the molecule that we're talking about, it's identical. It truly is a drop-in. It is not well, it'll be kind of close, we'll make a few adjustments here. No, you're making a molecule that is the same. And that to us is probably one of the most important pieces to it. The specifications that are the same, the final product quality is the same, all the existing testing and that has been done, they can all be transferred over because in the end, the molecule is the same. And the transparency piece, of course, is important because as I touched on prior to this, right, it must be auditable, right? And it must be auditable by a third party. And that to me is so important because consumers need, demand, and deserve transparency. And that is the one thing we accomplish with this by using a third-party certification. And the efficiency piece, and that one is something that is a great advantage. For example, in Shell, a part of our sustainable journey, right, is we aspire, of course, to decarbonize our process, but to also contribute and enable the circular economy, not just ours, but also our customers. And this is where, for example, some of you, in the audience, you may be thinking, well, I have a process that's already, on the end of, fully bio, or maybe I want to be at roughly, I want to gradually move into the space. I want to go from 10 to 20%, of my process. I want it to be sustainable. I want to bring in all the blends, because I cannot at this time get to it immediately. Well, what mass balance does, it allows you to gradually move into and transition into the sustainable regime that you want to be at your own pace, and it kind of helps you achieve your circular economy growth at your pace. And then, of course, assurance. The assurance is that this is not new. It sounds new when I speak of it, but it is not new, right? Because yes, it may seem new on the chemicals, industrial chemical segment space, but it isn't, or in the specialty chemicals space here, because mass balance has been around for a while. And typically, for example, it's been used in industrial agriculture or say cotton and foods. But where most of us, and where I would teach my family about mass balance is on green electricity, for example, right? I use that example a lot because after all, when we're pulling off the grid and we're saying, yes, we have a green electricity, well, that's really just a solar or wind source that has fed into the grid and we're pulling from it. And that's been well established for many, many, many years, as a basically an element of the mass balance principle. So the next slide in here, I want to now, I've kind of spoken to you in general about mass balance and as to what it is, what it can be. I want to speak to you directly about what we do in Shell Chemicals, right? So this is actually our process. This is not a conceptual an idea or anything like it. Shell branded neodyne, alpha olefins, and branded neodol alcohols and alcohol ethoxylates. They have been used for a long time, and they have multiple applications in the personal care and beauty segments. Those products have been there. They've been used in multiple different formulations. But what we are also now doing is when we're bringing in, for example, biofeeds. So biofeeds that we're currently sourcing can be a soybean oil, I list rapeseed oil, ethanol, of course, from corn, and the biocircular feeds. And what we're practicing, for example, we're taking used cooking oil and converting it. We also have some feeds that originate from the wood pulp industry. All of those, either on the top, for example, they go through a hydroprocessor or something. And then, of course, we have our classic fossil feeds, which come in from, say, they come from dry gas or from crude. those in the end, they go through the intermediate process and they make ethylene. Now, and those, when that ethylene there is sourced from either one of those processes, you cannot tell them apart, okay? Because it's CH2, it's an ethylene molecule, okay? And that is now what we have now is a commingled feeds that have generated a one unique product that is common. And then that moves forward into what we have been practicing now for several decades, if you will. I think it's several decades, and which is the oligomerization in the shell higher olefin polymerization process. Some of you might know it as SHOP, right? Because what we're doing, we're just growing the olefin chain to make alpha olefins. So the shell branded neodynes and now bio-based shell neodynes. So for example, I know some folks will use these. For example, you take a C6 olefin, which is 1-hexene or 1-octene, for example, that once derivatized, there's some of those molecules be used in hand lotions, for example, because they have wonderful properties, and also you can take a C10 alpha olefin and derivatize it for in the fragrance industries. And then that same molecule, that same alpha olefin can then be reacted gas and hydroformulated in our shell hydroformulation process. And now we make shell branded neodyl alcohols, or in this case now, once we bring in the mass balance, we have bio-based shell neodyl alcohols. And again, from that, we can also then take the alcohols and react it with ethylene oxide to make the shell branded alcohol ethoxylates. And what's interesting, I showed this to you because you can see how the ethylene molecules that came from the biofeeds and went all the way through, whether circular or fossil, went all the way through. Well, it is an ethylene molecule, and the ethylene oxide that we use can also be mass balanced into the scheme to where now even your ethoxylate units have a mass balance component. This is currently what we practice at Shell. This is what, when we say we're providing innovative solutions to you, is we are demonstrating that we can bring in sustainable feeds. In this case, I show on left, top left, and also on the left side at the bottom there, I can show these feeds coming in to make what amounts to be a bio-based ethylene molecule, which then undergoes a series of processes, to make the bio-based olefins, the branded neodyls, and the ethoxylates. On this next slide here, I just want to give you some examples of where we can contribute in the personal care and beauty formulations. I give examples here, and those examples are based on existing applications of our products. So when you look at the products listed on there, the first two numbers represent the carbons, the alcohol units. So bio-based shell neodyl 23 and 45, and beneath that the 5. So these are three examples of the alcohols that we would make. For example, 23 is a mixed blend of C12 and C13 alcohols. 45 is C14 and C15 alcohols. These types of materials, for example, are used as skin lotions and creams. They have wonderful emollient properties, so they behave as such or apply as such. And also some people, and there are some applications where we've seen where people use them as viscosity control because they have unique properties. And on top of that, the alcohols themselves, right, they're colorless, and they tend to be odorless, and they have high purity. They're very, very pure materials. So that tends to basically, when you're making formulations of them, you don't typically see yellowing in them because, again, they're highly pure products. And so that's an advantage too when we're handling those kinds of materials. And I list also here a couple of different ethoxylates, right? So 91, of course, represents a carbon chain of C9, so nonene through C11, which is a unit decene. So it's a mixture of C9 through 11 alcohol. And the 135 series is a tri-alcohol component blend. So it has a mixture of C11 alcohols, it has C13 and C15 in a particular ratio, which gives it some very unique properties. And so when I mentioned, for example, a bio-based neodyl 91.6, and it, for example, has applications in skincare, and it can be used in creams and lotions, for example. 91 has demonstrated applications in skin and hair care, also facial cleansers, and also in hair mousse, if I have any today. And typically now, when we speak about the lower mole ethoxylates, like I reference the 6 and the 8 mole ethoxylates, right? That represents an average of 6 moles of EO on the alcohol units. The other one represents an 8 mole. The lower mole ones, 1, 2s, and 3s, those are typically derivatized and used as a sulfate and surfactant applications. And you'll see those, for example, in applications that require, say, a rinse off or a cleansing. So it could be a shampoo, it could be a liquid soap. So those are typically where we'll often see those types of material used. So what I wanted to just give you a flavor here is where we have demonstrated that we can make bio-based products. So in this case, again, the branded bio-based neodols and neodol ethoxylates. So this is where we know places where we have shown applicability. I did not include the neodynes, but I did mention to you that, for example, the 14 different, like a C10 I mentioned, 1-decene can be derivatized to an alcohol that has wonderful fragrances. I wanted to kind of really touch a little bit more about sustainability. Recall earlier when we asked customers, we said, what is sustainable to you, right? We had all these definitions. So when I talked to different people, I said, they said, well, it's natural. Well, it's interesting in the context of personal care. Natural often, when you say a product is got natural components, well, typically that has either a palm oil or coconut oil, originated raw materials, right? PKO, the palm kernel oil source materials, right? And now those themselves, they're very, you see them in a lot of products, right? And from terms of sustainability, of course, well, that alcohol unit is clearly biogenic, and there's no question about that, right? I mean, it comes from coconut oil or a palm source. And then, of course, if you're making an ethoxylate derivative, and that EO can either be mass balanced in, or if not, then you have a predominantly still a very sustainable raw material. Where we're seeing some gaps or some challenges that need to be mitigated is really around, the deforestation. So right now, for example, because our products, for example, they fit into the personal care space, as does palm. And one of the things we're seeing too, and yes, it is a comparison, if you will, I mean, it is, right, is I know the palm oil industry right now, they have some scrutiny that's kind of, being, undertaken by typically you're seeing this in Europe, right? In the EU, you have the Deforestation Act, and they're really looking at, it's really concerning the heavy deforestation, and you have a lot of CO2 generation from your land clearing fires, and there's a lot of biodiversity loss, as we look to generate more of these raw materials. So that in itself is a concern that is currently being looked at very, very heavily. I believe there was supposed to be some legislation that was going to really close to ban some of these materials coming in, but I think it's being pushed off till, I believe it's next year. It's been delayed by a year. It would have been October of this year, but I believe now it's been pushed to sometime next year. And then also when you look about sustainability and palm oils and everything in the supply chain, one of the things you often see is, at least when you compare them, is the availability of palm is often tied to the monsoonal activities, right? So because that can affect the harvest season and you can delay it. So you'll see some of the gaps or the slowdowns in the supply chain, and the material availability kind of gets pinched back. Then you see price fluctuations. And then of course, more recently, right, and this hopefully will not be long-lived, you have a lot of restrictions in the Red Sea due to the conflicts in that part of the world, to where you're not seeing a lot of traffic going through there, and that has restricted the availability of some of the palm-based type products, which we again, yes, we do kind of compete with that, but it is the reality. And then those two bullets, especially the last one, right? The reason I bring that up is because when we look at carbon emissions, right, and there was an interesting study done by some folks here that I list, right, where it said close to a third of the carbon emissions, right, across, and when you look at the beauty products specifically, right, they come from the supply chain. It's just a movement of products from where it starts all the way to the end. And so that is something that we as an industry, we have to be better at. I kind of really want to finish up by just talking a little bit about regulatory challenges. Because again, that is clearly something that, in different parts of the businesses and areas, we face different challenges, but they're there and they're there for a good reason. So we do need to be cognizant of it and pay attention to it. And of course, the number one thing that we have to pay attention to, and not the number one, a key regulatory challenge right now is 1,4-dioxane. Some people will often refer to it as the elephant in the room, right? Because any molecule that is derivatized by EO, ethylene oxide, to make an ethoxylate, for example, depending on how you do it, you have the potential of making 1,4-dioxane. It's there, and what's happened is over the the recent past, for example, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, it lists 1,4-dioxane as a likely carcinogen. And then and more recently, the U.S. The state of New York, it has limited the levels of 1,4-dioxane in final formulations. I think it's 2 parts per million in the final formulation dish. And at the end of this year, starting January 1, 2025, I believe it'll be 1 part per million. Or maybe we're already at the 1 part per million. And we have similar legislation is proposed in Canada, and it's also being reviewed in Germany. I think Germany has delayed its implementation, or there's a lot of activity by CESIO trying to study and understand that. But I do believe the enactment in Germany has been postponed, I think, for a final review to be next year. And also, you're seeing a lot of municipal reviews. So your water flows that go out into the municipal discharges, there's a lot of emphasis on 1,4-dioxane levels in that. So those are also undergoing review. I mentioned this because, I talked to you a lot about, I said, we make neutral ethoxylates, and those are used in a variety of formulations out there. Well, one of the key points that I wanted to mention was that bio-based Shell neutral ethoxylates, we have demonstrated now, and again, we've demonstrated, for a long time, and because again, our products are the same. They're identical. Our processes are the same. Just because we have a bio-based ethylene source that we're now making a bio-based neutral ethoxylates, right? We have shown that, for example, the 1,4-dioxane level is very low. It's typically well less than 0.3 parts per million, as measured by GCMS-SIM. So that is an advantage that we feel also that we can contribute to in helping a formulator who is looking at using an ethoxylate. And then lastly, I just want to touch on the ingredient labeling and safer choice. As you know, the US EPA, they have a voluntary program of safer choice. Really, in a nutshell, right, what we're talking about is, it's ensuring that products that we make, they're safer for people, pets, and planets, and at the same time, we do not want to lag or a drop in performance. It has to perform identical. It cannot be an inferior product. So that is the expectation. And in Shell, all of our bio-based Shell neutral products that we show, actually all of our products, they undergo OECD testing. And that's one of the very rigorous testing because it covers biodegradation, the degradation products, and aquatic toxicity, And to date, I show on there that as we go through several of our products, they've been certified on the safer choice ingredient list, and that I just kind of show you on there as an example of what we are doing. And some of them too are certified under the EU Ecolabel, which is a similar type of program, that really provides the consumer with some benefits and expectations, I guess, if you will, that we are providing them with a good and safer product. And then lastly, so I guess I will kind of conclude, so what did I want to show you? Well, I want to remind you that when we talk to everybody, just kind of do a full circle in there. When we look at consumers, we ask them, what do they want? Clearly, performance quality is key. That is the primary purchasing reference when a person goes out and say, I want this material as a beauty, a personal care, something I'm going to put on my skin. I want it to perform well. That is my number one concern, And of course, we showed that, yes, they have a strong interest in 100% biofeed, but clearly also they were very much interested in a mixed biofeed because it helps get there. And I'd like to believe that I've been able to explain to you that biomass, for example, we see as a viable way to, or an enabler to help you along your meet your sustainability goals. It's what we're, it's because we feel, for example, depending on where you are on that curve, depending on how much material you want to pull into, we can help you achieve that. And also that the bio-based shell needle products, right? Again, I kind of showed you the list on there. We feel that that can be used as a sustainable ingredient in your formulated supply chain. So with that, Tim, I will do my best to answer any questions that anyone may have. Thank you all.
Thank you very much indeed, Jarek. That's great. Yes, we've had plenty of questions coming in the Q&A box. So without further ado, I'll go straight into them. The first question is from Sabine Turner, or Sabina. I apologize if I got one of those wrong. How do you anticipate to deal with MB, which I guess is mass balance? How do you anticipate to deal with mass balance in light of the EU deforestation regulation? So does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, so if I think I understand the question correctly, for us, right, we have multiple sources of raw materials from a mass balance, right? So we're not really sourcing it. We try not to source it from any place because all of them undergo a review by the certifying agency. I think with the EU deforestation, for example, the idea of, well, is soy coming from there, right? That potentially could be a problem, but we do source our materials from different areas of the world. We're not really fixated on or fixed on one particular source. So, for example, in the U.S., right, we're sourcing from either corn or, we're basically sourcing it from the products from where we are, right? You don't want to base your source from someplace very, very far away from where your cracker or wherever it is. I don't believe it will affect us, in that regard, because again, it's really, we're going to source it from an accepted and reviewed raw material source. I hope I answered that question for you.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, that's good. Question from Mark DeMoule. Are there parts per million or parts per billion level impurities in the fossil feedstocks that aren't present in the biofeeds?
Wow. Thank you, Mark. So as an analytical chemist, I always tell people, I mean, because you throw in parts per million and parts per billion, because you've gone through the cracker, our ethylene source, I'm going to speak again here specifically about ethylene because I can comment on that. Our ethylene that we're using in the bio-based shell products line, they're analyzed similarly. And typically the impurity profiles are down to the parts per billion. And to date, we've been running this for quite a while. The products exiting the cracker, we cannot tell the difference. And I think that in itself has to do with how one separates ethylene from a cracker and how one generates that as a raw material. So no, we do not see any different. And I assure you, we have looked very carefully on there. Part of the management of change into bringing this process into the system was to ensure that indeed the bio-based raw material ethylene is truly identical. So no, we have not detected any.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question from Slavomir Kabulski. Wondering how your feedstock can influence the level of residual dioxins in the final material. Isn't it strictly due to controls during and post ethoxylation step? The feedstock shouldn't matter, right?
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. It does not matter because the 1,4-dioxane will occur in the ethoxylation unit. Now, there are some people who have studied, and including myself, on whether or not the incoming EO, right, could have 1,4-dioxane in it. And if you have mass balance your EO, you could say that. But the chemistry, no, it does not originate from the source. It will happen on the back end of the downstream. I wanted to comment on it because on the 1,4-dioxane piece, we have demonstrated low levels in the bio-based shell branded products, but no, it will not originate from the raw material, and it's strictly going to come from the end reactions. Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Next question from Erica Young. How long does the 0.3 parts per million level hold for? I think this refers to one of the Neodol products, doesn't it? How long does the 0.3 ppm level hold for? Is this dependent on specific storage containers and conditions being utilized?
I think when you look at ethoxylates, typically ethoxylates on their own prior to formulation, they do not show any growth, at least not that we have seen. We have data, for example, where the material is stored for, I have it well over 6 months, and also the ACI also published on that recently on its own in storage. There, we've had other different companies have also studied this. We do not see any growth on its own. There may be growth after final formulations because now you're doing other different chemistries, but on its own, we have not seen any.
Okay, good. Okay, we'll have some more questions come in. Is there a particular feedstock that you recommend for best results?
I think not necessarily, because in the end, right, you have, if you recall that one slide that I showed where I went through, I said I'll use a Shell one specifically, for example, right? And I said you had biofeeds or biomass feeds, and you had biocircular feeds. I think the feedstock really, it should really be dependent upon where you are, right? Because if you're, for example, let's say, if you have a cracker and you have your whole manufacturing supply chain that you've mass balancing this, and let me just use the US, right? I'll just use the US Gulf Coast as an example. If you have it sitting there, it doesn't make much sense to source a raw material that's from Europe right now, or even in the US from the other side of, the US or in South America, because your raw material source should be the one that is most convenient, most available, because in the end, recall, part of our whole, our emissions, for example, in our supply chain, they're tied to how far we have to make the molecule move. So you really want to have a raw material that is closest to the raw material source that you're going to use is closest to your actual manufacturing supply position or place.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Jerry. You were talking about 1,4-dioxane earlier. The questions coming about Germany. Are they close to making a decision? Are regulations expected soon?
No, I think what happened is there was a lot of discussions in Germany with the agencies, environmental agencies, and of course, and all the industrial bodies and CZO and the lobbying bodies, if you will. And they postponed that to, I believe, to next year. So they have a decision on that sometime next year. I know in California, they're expected sometime soon, but Germany, they've delayed that decision to sometime in 2025. I do not have the exact date.
Okay, well, I'm afraid that'll have to wrap things up for the time being. There are a few more questions, but that was largely the end of the presentation. If you missed any of this, it has been recorded, is being recorded, and it'll be available. It'll be sent out by email to registered attendees, and also it'll be available on the website, the Personal Care website, under the webinars tab. Thank you. Goodbye.